Good morning and welcome to Rising. We have a fantastic show planned for you today, especially because we have another new co-host joining us, Olayemi Olurin. Welcome.
I'm excited to be here, Robby.
We're so glad to have you with us. And Bree will be back, of course, with us tomorrow, and Kim Iverson will be joining us later today. But first, a string of gun violence unfortunately swept the country over the weekend.
A mass shooting event on Philadelphia's popular South Street saw 3 people killed and 11 injured on Saturday night. Officials say multiple shooters were involved and that they believe the violence was sparked by an argument between one of the deceased victims and another man.
Philly, unfortunately, wasn't the only place facing fatalities. Tennessee, Michigan, South Carolina, and other states reported gun violence over the weekend that led to 10 deaths in total, including the attack in Philadelphia. Now, while there are a slew of gun reform bills expected to be voted on this week in the House, according to Punchbowl News, any realistic path to legislation is, of course, through the Senate, where a compromise gun reform bill could include a version of a red flag law, some enhanced background checks on gun sales, although not the broad background checks bill passed by the House last year, and or funding for mental health programs. So I think we always see a little bit of a spike in violence, I think, around this time of the year as the weather's nicer out. Finally, everyone is outside, unfortunately, shooting each other.
That's an interesting way to put it, Robby.
What do you make of the? So we talked on the show a lot about the red flag laws. We had David French on, who's like a major conservative proponent of those. I think I'm open in theory to red flag laws, although I guess I am somewhat confused that the definition of an unstable person, people reporting their neighbors or people known to them, could also someday include just like political dissidents or people who are crazy but not actually dangerous or something like that.
I understand the perspective, but I guess for me, it's that we already do this in some way. As a public defender in criminal court, we take people's guns the minute they're accused of a charge. They give them an order of protection. They say they can't have any weapons. So to me, it's not really any different than anything we've been engaging in the whole time. We're just focusing on it now.
It's more like a kind of restraining order type situation, right?
Exactly. Right now, we're concerned. There's a red flag. There's something that leads us to believe that you might be a danger. So let's take this from you in the interim and figure out what's going on so that nothing can happen. Or at the very least, we're not sitting here with egg on our face like we could have prevented this.
Right. Because in so many of these cases, I'm going to talk about this again on my radar today. My last 8 radars have been about this. The number of common people who do act responsibly in the mass shooter scenario, in the dangerous person with a gun scenario, who do speak up, who do report this person, and then there's no follow-up or not appropriate follow-up by law enforcement.
Exactly. So many of these shootings we've been seeing, right? Literally, we see that they've been called the police on before. We see manifestos, YouTube videos, just a laundry list of a paper trail of evidence in ways that we could have stopped this. So I think that this is a good way for us to go about trying to address this problem.
Especially if we're going to pivot, and I think the only way, given that there is a lot of support for gun rights in this country, there are a lot of guns already, we debate a lot, what steps could actually even be taken to restrict the guns themselves, and it's very fraught. So maybe the conversation needs about, this is the kind of person who can have access to a firearm, rather than this is the kind of firearm that can be available.
I think it's a mild compromise, right? Like if you see on both sides, we see, on one side feels like almost any, proposal for any kind of gun regulation is a violation of the rights. And on the other side, you see some of us that want, bans completely. I think it's a middle ground, right? Okay, we don't necessarily touch your guns. You still have your guns, but we're saying, hey, these people that are giving us pause, let's maybe not let them have
crazy, no guns. Yeah.
Right.
Well, according to the New York Times, Democrats are facing pressure ahead of the midterms to crack down on crime, with lawmakers such as New York Mayor Eric Adams and candidates in Maryland, California, and Oregon ramping up anti-crime rhetoric. This comes as the head of the Democratic Party, President Biden, is reportedly frustrated at being unable to turn the tide after a wave of challenges hitting his administration from not only gun violence, inflation, COVID, Ukraine. They can't do anything right. Escalating crime is a major concern of voters. I want to balance concerns about crime with obviously respect for civil liberties and not being totally thrilled with the idea of giving police more resources given how well they have their track record.
Right.
But how do you answer, how does someone like yourself, who I know is a major believer in criminal justice reform, from the left perspective, I'm not sure people are satisfied with the answers being proposed.
Well, they're not trying any of the answers that are being proposed by the left, right? It's hard to say, oh, we're not satisfied or we don't like this approach, or it wouldn't work when you never actually try it. The only approach we have in place is giving billions of dollars to policing, and that's not changing anything. And in the case of Eric Adams, New York City gives more money to policing and everything than anybody else, and we've given more. Nothing's changed. So if you continue to say we have this increased problem with violence, increased problem with crime, but we are only employing that method that you like and giving more and more to it, clearly I think we should try something different. And when Eric Adams talks about gun violence, I need him to talk about the fact that NYPD shot and killed 2 people in the last 2 weeks. So he needs to discuss that.
Yeah, but that said, I mean, don't you think that more police? I think if there were more police and they were actually on the streets, if they were actually
they're on the streets.
Are they?
Streets, Robby.
They're just ignoring. They're just somebody comes and stabs somebody while they're getting the ATM machine, and
That's
they're
just
just
not
oh,
what
I
they
didn't see
do.
that. Well, right, that's the problem.
That's just not what they do, but
They
it's
don't care.
not a lack of training. It's not a lack of resources. It's not a lack of presence. We have police. You see police anywhere you go in New York City, tons of them in hordes, on their phone, chilling, doing something, harassing people for jumping the turnstile, petty things, but they're just not interested in addressing and dealing with this bigger crime. But it's not a lack of resources or training or that they're
Did
not
you hear
there.
about the police that let the person drown over the weekend? That story?
Listen,
That was in, I'm pulling it up. That was in Tempe, Arizona. It was a mentally disturbed-ish person, and there was some suggestion that him and his wife or domestic partner or something, I think he's an unhoused person, but they were having some kind of episode. It didn't seem like it was particularly scary or violent. For some reason, the police came.
That's how it is.
And then we're talking to them, and then he became irate. It was by a lake. He wandered into the lake and was starting to drown, and they said, we're not gonna stop you from drowning, and then he did drown and died.
Brings up 2 excellent points. That one, police don't actually have a duty to help us, right? They don't. Yeah. They constitutionally don't, which is insane that we put all our resources and our faith in this entire body of people that they're supposed to help us, but then they don't actually have to, and we see very often that they choose not to. And then it brings us to another issue that when people have issues or people have help, people call 911. They don't necessarily want the police. They're even asked. They say, oh, I want mental health. I want an ambulance. I want this. But who shows up every time? The police. And then the police decide, oh, we're either going to not help or we're going to arrest somebody.
And they have this tremendous protection against liability if they do something wrong, which, if you're going to argue they should have that, there should be a duty for them to do an affirmative, positive intervention to help people.
Right. If we have a system in place that says, you know what, I'm going to give you immunity, I don't want you to be, held personally liable, all these different things, then we should have some method in place where they're regularly heard accountable, maybe in a lesser format than the criminal courts, but I think they should, right? If they're arresting people all day, every day, why are they above the criminal court for their actions? But if we have that, we should be holding them more accountable, or at the very least requiring them to do their job.
All right. Well, I'm going to also be criticizing the police in my radar. So to veer topics slightly before we get there, what do you make of the suggestion that this is all, this violence we're seeing, this uniquely American violence, is reflective of some mental health crisis in this country?
Listen, it's not that I don't think we have mental health issues. I think the problem is too often when we have systemic problems or societal issues that we see in a large way, instead we shift to this mental health narrative in order to put it on an individual. That's what tends to happen. And they individualize the cases rather than look at these larger issues, right? It can't just all be, America's not the craziest place on earth, can't be. I have a hard time believing that it's the nuttiest place on earth.
That would surprise me too.
Yeah, it would surprise me. So if we have all these issues and we're repeatedly seeing these different problems, right? We have gun violence, and we also are the largest manufacturer of guns. We have, easy access to guns. Clearly there's something there. So I think it's about us not addressing these root causes enough.
Interesting. All right, well, coming up next, I will tell you what's on my radar. I already gave you a preview, so you can guess, but stick around for the actual thing.